Welcome to Stories with Brisco and Bradshaw, a special edition. That I am Bradshaw. That would be your Chickasaw native, your Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma's favorite son, Mr. Gerald Brisco. We got nothing but shooters, shooters, and more shooters. And I'm a cowboy. I ain't a shooter, so I am the moderator in this thing. We got Mr. Jake Shannon, who knows as much about shooters, Billy Robinson, catch wrestling, the snake pit wigging, as anybody in the world. And we've got Karl Gotch is not only best student of the famous Malenko family, but also the best looking student that Karl Gotch ever had, Mr. Jody Malenko. So guys, welcome to the show about nothing but shooters.
How about me?
Well, yeah, I've already introduced you. I said you were a Chickasaw native, Chickasaw Hall of Famer, Oklahoma.
Wow, man, I got shortchanged on that.
No, you didn't. You got the
first
I did. Yeah, you weren't listening.
No, you did. Yeah, you did.
You're ruining the show.
Brisco's already arguing with the ref.
Yeah.
I'm the moderator here.
I want plus others,
I just want you to, I don't care about the podcast at all now. I just want you to follow me around as my hype man.
That's right. I am your hype guy.
You're hyped.
Getting ready to come into the room.
You're hyped, man.
Jerry,
I'll explain it to you later, Brisco.
You already see when he doesn't have his headphones and hearing aids in. It's even.
Where's that cold at? I got a cold runner.
Hey, so Jake, let's start with you because you're the one written books and videos about everything. The greatest shooters of all time. What we're going to talk about specifically is Billy Robinson, who you knew very well, Mr. Danny Hodge, who Mr. Brisco knew very well, and Mr. Karl Gotch, who Mr. Malenko knew very, very well. All students of these great shooters, these great teachers. So, Jake, let's start with you. The Wiggins Snake Pit, Billy Robinson. Tell us a little bit about Billy Robinson.
All right. Well, I love this concept. I think that all three guys definitely deserve to win, but I'm here to make the case for Billy. As such, I'm going to take us way back. I'm going to Billy's. I'm going to start this with a genetic argument.
Wow.
Yeah, you guys are in trouble. I dug into my.
Hodge broke pliers, so this one's going to be tough. The genetic part.
Billy had 3 chromosomes.
Okay, so my genetic argument. This is the first prong of my attack. The genetic argument is that Billy has the greatest genes for this of anybody, starting with his great-great-grandfather, Harry Robinson, who was the bare knuckle boxing champion of the UK.
Really? His great-great was what year was that? Do you know? Around about?
I think that has to be the early 1800s. His name was Harry Robinson.
Now, did he fight with the gypsies? The Gypsy King, Tyson Fury, but Bartley Gorman, was a famous undefeated gypsy legend fighter, the Gypsy King before Tyson Fury. Would he fight with the gypsies, or did he fight? Because there was separate fighting. There was like the Irish gypsy fighting, and then there was also the English coal mine bare knuckle fighting. Which group was he with?
So he was with so you have to remember, right? Like the Irish, historically in England, they were kind of treated like how the African Americans were treated here in the United States. Like they were very marginalized. They were kind of not treated very well. It was illegal for the Irish to read and write for like 1,000 years under British rule. So they were definitely like in a class system, And so Harry Robinson, Billy Robinson's great-great-great-grandfather, was the British heavyweight bare knuckle boxing champion. His son, Billy's great grandfather, Johnny, was a very famous, well-known featherweight. Billy's father, and I had this, I even took notes. You guys, I've told you, you're in trouble. His father held the North of England championship in boxing. Billy's uncle, Alf, won the Lonsdale Trophy in 1934, boxed Max Baer. And Alf, interestingly enough, was the guy who scouted the 1948 Olympics, which were held in London, for wrestlers to bring back up to Billy Riley's gym. Everybody uses the name Snake Pit. It's kind of lost its meaning. when I'm speaking specifically by Billy Riley's gym, which was Karl and Billy's coach at Wigan. Alf Robinson, Billy's uncle, a championship boxer and a pro wrestler in his own right, Alf scouted a young Karl Gotch at the 1948 Olympics in London, and is the reason why Karl ended up back at the Billy Riley gym. Now we go into Billy's genes, not just his lineage, going back many generations as a champion.
And by the
Billy
way,
himself,
you're winning. You're winning right now with the judge when you bring up Jethro Bodine's father, which is Max Barrett.
Yeah, I love it.
Good,
I love it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Matt, so
If you bring
Billy
up Ellie
himself-
May, especially the corn that played the last thing,
You look good though. Ellie
show's
looked
over.
good.
The show's
Hey,
over.
listen.
You won.
I had the hots for Granny.
I think Ellie Mae might have made more money on OnlyFans than the Beverly Hillbillies had. The time's been different.
Oh, hey,
But-
hey, now hater. No reason to hate.
No, I'm not hating. I'm like, where's the money? I think she'd make a lot of money. She was one heck of a specimen. But that aside, Billy himself really established himself as an amateur champion, and I don't think people really recognize that
No.
as much because of his accomplishments in pro wrestling. But I'm just rattling this off. He held in amateurs 3 Lancashire titles, 2 North County titles, the light heavyweight British Championship, the Irish Championship, and he won the European Open in 1957 in Ireland. He competed in 2 different categories: light heavyweight, which he won, and he beat an Olympian. What's his name? Jerry Martina. And then he lost the heavyweight, but he did win the European Open for the light heavyweight. He lost the heavyweight, the second division that he was competing in, to another bronze medalist Olympian named Ken Richmond, who then he went on to beat a month later. There's also another guy in England. His name, he just passed away, Jack Montfort. He was a catch-as-catch-can guy and a judo champion. He has repeatedly gone on record saying that Billy was the only guy that England ever had a chance, ever in the history of British wrestling, of getting a gold medal. But at 18, Billy then went pro and went where the money was at.
I'm sorry. Now he went pro in wrestling or boxing?
In professional wrestling. He was going to go into boxing, but when he was 14, and maybe he was a little younger, but he was a young man. He was playing with some kids, and some kid threw like a Coca-Cola box at him when they were playing, and it sliced his retina off. And so because he had this bad, if you see him, he's kind of cross-eyed.
Right.
And that's because of that early injury that he had, and that's what forced him. He couldn't get a boxing license, so he went into wrestling. And the rest, as they say, is history. And that, by the way, if I may bring up Dwayne Johnson.
Of course.
Ooh.
I mean, they jump
If
on
you've
the
got
bandwagon.
Jethro
Keep going.
Bodine, Ellie
Keep
Mae,
going.
and The Rock, you're way ahead now. You're like Seabiscuit. You're way ahead.
I'm going for the jugular, guys. Like I'm
You got it
in
right
this
off
to
the
win
bat
this. So,
too.
so Dwayne Johnson, one thing that I want to get the record straight here, as amazing and influential, whatever that he does, he keeps telling this story about his dad gouging Billy's eye out, and that's why his eye's all messed up. It's factually 100% inaccurate, and all the people like George Gordienko and stuff that were there verified this. But The Rock got the information from Peter Maeva's wife, who is not necessarily the most truth-oriented individual on the planet. So I just got to get that out there. That's my case for Billy.
So,
And I haven't even gotten into-
in fairness to The Rock, sometimes with history, things get repeated, and finally it becomes truth, whether it is or not. So,
In this business in particular, oh my gosh, how do you keep anything straight?
right. Because it's hard to go back and get the facts out of something, especially before the internet and before all this different stuff that we had. So,
In all fairness, yes.
I'm sticking up for The Rock here.
No, that's fair, but I do want to get that record set straight that that
fully
injury is where
understand.
the eye came from, not some street fight, which he actually did win, and there's witnesses to this. But that
So wait,
alone,
Maeva's did not win the street fight.
no. Mm-mm. That's according to the people that were there, the other people that were there.
He went from the barbarians back in prehistoric days all the way up to Dwayne Johnson and his 5-minute delivery.
Yeah.
If I had any idea,
We got some work to do here.
you guys
That
are
was
in
only
trouble.
one prong of my attack.
No, I'll make this easy. Billy wins.
Yeah, well, why'd you go away, Jody? You that sore
He's
loser or
out.
what?
I give
He's
up.
tapping out.
I give up.
So, Mr. Brisco, tell us. So you have Danny Hodge, who's an undefeated amateur and a boxer and wrestler. I think the only guys that only win both. But I'll let you tell the story. You got your Oklahoma legend and became a worldwide legend with Mr. Danny Hodge.
Well, that's true, guys, and I'm here to I can't spout off the genetics. I just know Danny Hodge's dad was a roughneck, and for us who grew up out in the Southwest, we know what a roughneck is, and we know what kind of a lifestyle they read. They just go in and walk into any place they want to walk in, beat the hell out of 3 or 4 guys, and their night is made, and they order a case of beer and drink it. So Danny came up in Perry, Oklahoma. They had a horrific fire at an early age and destroyed his house. His mom had 97% of her body burned, all kinds of skin grafts, all kinds of blood transfusions, and all that. His dad's and Danny survived the fire, but Danny had no place to go as a youth, probably 6, 7 years old. Story is, legend goes in Oklahoma that Danny was living on a riverbank. Reason he was living on the riverbank because they was having a drought in Oklahoma. It was right after the Dust Bowl days, and everybody knows about the Dust Bowl. So the riverbeds were basically dried up. So they would dig a hole in the side of the river and protect themselves from the elements. But every once in a while, one of those gully washers would come along and flood him out. So the fire department heard about Danny living on a riverbank. So the fire department, one of the firemen went down to the riverbank one day and found Danny living in his cave down there. This just shows you the toughness that Danny had at an early age, the survival that Danny had at an early, the desire to better himself at an early age. So this fireman got Danny, took him to the firehouse, and they made a bunk for him at the firehouse. So Danny basically from 6 years old to all the way through high school lived at the firehouse. He had gone through uncles and aunts and all that, and he was just one of those children that nobody wanted Danny around because he was so mean and so wild. And so Danny at the firehouse, one of the guys that was an ex-Perry wrestler. Perry, Oklahoma was a town, probably 1,500 people in it, and it's a roughneck, old town, farming town, and people grow up very tough around those type of environments. And so Danny grew up around those farming, so they put him in. This farmer was a wrestler, so he said, "Danny, you need to go out for the wrestling team." And Danny, he said, okay. So the fireman took him, introduced him to the wrestling coach there. Danny, from his first time he stepped on the mat till last, he pinned everybody he wrestled in high school. Everybody. Now this is Oklahoma, where I know John got a lot of comments, but Oklahoma and wrestling is king in Oklahoma, as my two astute opponents here in this debate will testify to. So Danny made it through high school, undefeated 2 times. He got beat one time. He got beat one time in high school wrestling, one of his very early matches. But he won 3 state titles, and he got out of high school. And like I said, Danny wasn't exactly the studious type, so he kind of forego college, and he joined the Navy for 2 years. Back then, you can join the Navy. This is during the patriotic time of our country, right after the War II. So Danny joined the Navy, served in a couple of places. While he was in the Navy, somebody heard that he was an Oklahoma state champion wrestler. He was up in Chicago at the naval base station up there. And they brought him out. And back in those days, service sports, you guys will probably testify and probably know. Service wrestling was really tough. The Army and the Navy, all those teams had Olympians. You know, that's basically where our Olympians come from, because the government, nobody subsidized you in amateur wrestling. So if you're going to be an amateur wrestler, you either had to come from a family that had a lot of money where you could just forego all your stuff after you got out of school and train, or join the Army or Navy and join their wrestling team, where you had a job and you were getting paid to wrestle and you were getting your service time in. So during that time is when Danny discovered international wrestling. So he went on and he became a two-time. It wasn't, well, people projected him to be the greatest wrestler in the world at the time. That Danny became the greatest wrestler in the world. There were no projections, you know. Danny actually went and did the deal. He first Olympic was in '52, Helsinki, Finland. He qualified not only for freestyle wrestling, but for Greco style wrestling, which was unheard of. I mean, the two styles like that. So it just showed once again the versatility of this man, what he could do. And so he made the Olympic team. He went over and competed in both of them. He ended up getting third in first Olympics at like 19 years old, 19 something like that, 19 years old. Got third, got beat by the defending Olympic champion. And at the same time, he hurt his shoulder and he wasn't able to compete in the Greco style. So now we fast forward 4 years later, he's still in the Navy. He makes the Sydney Games, Sydney Olympics. You got to go down there, and he's ranked #1 in his weight class. And once again, he qualified for both the Greco and freestyle again. But he had a good friend from Iowa who had never been out of the country, and they became friends during workouts and all this stuff. So Danny gave up his spot on the Greco team so his buddy could go to Australia, some place he always wanted to go for the first time in his life, and leave Iowa for the first time in his life. And everybody knows you want to leave Iowa. So sort of like Texas. Everybody knows you want to leave Texas.
So
anyway,
wait a minute. Hey, Jody, last year at the Hall of Fame in Iowa, Mr. Brisco, he thinks he has a heart attack. Turns out it was exhaustion, and he passed.
Jody was there. Jody gave me the heart attack.
Well, yeah, okay. So as they're wheeling him out,
well, somebody told me I needed to give you mouth to mouth, and I said he's gone.
He's dead. He's
dead.
As they're wheeling him out, you know, I'm not sure he's going to make it or not. And I said, Mr. Brisco, because he's not responding. I said, "Don't you die in Iowa? You know how embarrassing that would be." and he kicks out. And he kicked out. He goes, "No shit." And the paramedic's like, "Huh? What?"
Yeah. That actually saved my life, I guess. So thank you.
Yeah. Me telling him don't die in Iowa, it'd be too embarrassing.
So anyway, let me get back to Hodge. I'm old. You're kind of distract me, so I'll lose my train of thought here. So we're in Sydney, Australia. I was going to say Sydney, Iowa, but Sydney, Australia. Danny's wrestling a Belgium guy, and the Belgium guy is the defending champion. And Danny and him are tied 1-1. Danny gets thrown off the edge of the mat. And back in those days, there were none of these protective surfaces like they got nowadays. You know, you hit the floor, you basically hit a cement floor with this guy 220 pounds on top of it. So it hurt Danny's shoulder. So they finish the match, and the guy, they're tied, and the guy on criteria, a Russian referee, which it gets into politics here, and everybody knows there wasn't politics in the Olympics, years ago, as there still is today. But the Russians and a Bulgarian guy, they were basically teammates, and so something was worked out where, of course, Danny got beaten, and Danny ended up with a silver medal. Saying all that to say, the versatility of this guy, and the guy that Danny gave up his Greco spot was a silver medalist in the Greco-Roman also. So it shows you the quality that Danny had to compete with to make both teams there. But then Danny gets out of the Navy, and college coaches are clamoring after him, as you can imagine, like crazy. So he chose the University of Oklahoma, and he was always mad at Jack and I because Ed Gallagher, who Gallagher Hall is named after, didn't offer him a scholarship to Oklahoma State University, where Perry's like 16 miles from there. He said, so I made those cowboys pay every time I wrestled them. And he did. He pinned every cowboy he ever wrestled. So, but anyway, Danny goes through college now, undefeated, guys. Totally undefeated. Nobody late. He didn't give up a takedown for 3 years. Back in those days, freshmen weren't eligible, so you only had 3 years of eligibility. So he maxed out his college deal by going undefeated. His senior year, not only did he not give up a takedown, which, by the way, the only other guy that did that, I think, is my brother Jack, who never gave up a takedown his last year and his way to the national title. So Danny pinned his way entirely through the national championship. Once again, that mental toughness that Danny Hodge had to survive. From there, pro wrestling, as we all know, wasn't really looked upon as a favorable spot for successful amateur wrestlers to go into. So boxing, somebody taught Danny, you're fast with your hands and everything. You ought to try boxing. You can make some money at it. So Danny started amateur boxing. Once again, undefeated, like 16 straight bouts he had. Nobody lasted longer than that. Back in there, your AAU, your amateur boxing was only 3 rounds, right? So Danny was knocking these guys out before the 3rd round. 15 of the 16 guys he knocked out didn't even make it to the 2nd round. So that tells you, once again, the hand speed and the power that Danny Hodge had. We'll get into the apple crush and the powers later, but so Danny went undefeated and knocked everybody out in the amateur boxing. So okay, it's time to turn pro now. So Danny had 6 pro fights, didn't get paid for a single one of them. Once again, he knocked them all out except for one guy. And on that last bout, he came up against a seasoned pro. John, I sent you this interview a little bit earlier in a week here. Talked about this bout. Danny got beat. They stopped it because of blood. And as Danny explains to this interviewer how they got, his own corner man bladed Hodge, so Hodge would bleed out, and they couldn't continue to bat, so they could have a rematch later on. And so the referee stopped the bout. So that was Danny's that Nino Valdez or something like that guy fought. So that was the only blemish on Danny's record was that where the referee stopped it because the blade, where Danny's own quarterman bladed him and made Danny bleed, so the referee would stop the bout. So anyway, Danny they wanted to rebout, and they were building up the rebout, but Danny hadn't been paid for any of the bouts that he had done. So Danny, a poor guy from Oklahoma, just out of school and everything, he's, what am I going to do? He went back to Oklahoma, and then Leroy McGurk, great promoter, who was a Oklahoma State Cowboy national champion there, said, Danny, just bought into the pro wrestling deal. I want you to come and become a pro wrestler. So that's how Danny became a pro wrestler. So that's Danny's genetic background. That's Danny's coming up from the roots of Oklahoma, just basically a poor boy out in the middle of the plains. Nobody knew, and Danny made himself a superstar by his determination, his grit, and his courage to move forward. That's
and if I may, to this day, he's got the Hodge Trophy in amateur wrestling.
Yeah, that's equivalent to people who don't know the Heisman Trophy for college football. After you win the Hodge, it's for the most dominant wrestler in college, and whether the pins are just dominant through takedowns and not giving up points or whatever. But yeah, they named that award after Danny Hodge and present it every year.
He stretched me one time, Jake, but he got lucky.
All right, Jody, tell us about Karl.
Man, so Karl's lineage wasn't as glowing as Billy Robinson's. I mean, the only person in his background that could probably match up to anybody that we're talking about is his mom. His mom could have probably kicked everybody's ass. For years he would tell me how tough she was and how she just brutalized him, and he would go to his dad, and his dad would kind of take care of him. I met her towards the end of her life, and she was the sweetest lady, and she was just so kind to me, and it really pissed Karl off. He was like, God, that's it. Yeah. So anyway, look, all of these guys were born from adversity, right? They went through lives that they had difficulties in, situational and otherwise, environmental. And if you try and match against that, Karl's pretty heavy duty. So first of all, he grows up on the waterfront. He's a kid, tough environment. He ends up working in the foundry, wielding a hammer on steel, which predated the mace ball. He's up in the riggings of ships. He saved a guy's life once, got his finger caught, and that's what tore his finger off. And it was constant fighting for your life on this dock, along the waterfront in Antwerp that toughened him. But even more than that, he went through the war, and he ended up in a work camp, in a prisoner work camp. It wasn't a concentration camp. We had this discussion before, and he had to make his way through that. And this is just as he was pretty much peaking with his wrestling, where he was really becoming something to be known in Belgium at the time. And then the war happens, and he's part of this camp, and it just really took him down a notch. So when he went to the Olympics after that, and he was also Belgium national champion, I'm not sure how many times. I don't have all the facts and figures of a Jake Shannon. Who does? and so when he went to the Olympics, so that was 48, right? Yeah. When he went to the Olympics in 48, yeah, he was pretty much torn apart by having been through the war and dealing with what he dealt with. It's that old thing, who knows what if, right? If my aunt had, so, maybe, just maybe, he would have stood a better chance. But he was a Greco guy and a freestyle guy as well. So he had that going for him. And during that process, they had a school, the back of a bar kind of area, the horsehair mats. And I mean, he describes it so that you could almost, in my mind's eye, I've lived there. And, there are a couple guys that he helped train, Jeff and Joseph Mewis. Joseph Mewis was in the Olympics in 58, I think. He took a silver against a Japanese guy, Sasahara, who was probably the best single leg dive guy ever. And then, so that was Joseph. Jeff Mewis ended up taking gold in the world. So, as a coach, even though he was accomplished in his own right at that point in time, he was already becoming accomplished as a coach. And then we all know what happened from there. He eventually made his way through Europe. He got into pro and made his way through Europe, ended up in Wigan, Billy Joyce and those guys who he talks so highly of. He sang their praises constantly, but as Jake and I were just talking before this call, he also always pointed to the fact that the States was where all this really started and who had the toughest guys ever, even though we tend to, point a finger at Wigan. And then, eventually Karl makes his way through the States. A lot of people were scared to death of him. A lot of things happened. The stories are out there all over the place. And then he ends up in Japan. So, I mean, if we're really looking at this as who had the greatest impact and who was probably the most visible guy, none of these guys were gods. I mean, they were, but he was Kamisama. He was the god of wrestling in Japan. And that was legit. It wasn't just, this moniker that was thrown on him. He was responsible for not only, in his own right, being as tough as he was and getting on the mat with pretty much anybody and everybody, from Thez to Robinson to all the guys that we know. He went over to Japan and he set the tone for what would eventually become mixed martial arts, and built in Japan what moved on into the UFC and dominated mixed martial arts for many years. If you run through the list of UFC champions and people who have been Hall of Famers, most of these guys came at least through Karl, directly or indirectly. So he wins.
Hey, where did he get the name Gotch? Karl Gotch. That was
You know, he never. I mean, he didn't tell me. Maybe he told you, Jake. I mean, you know, he always pointed back to Frank Gotch and those guys, and you
Yeah.
know, back to
So
the
it was literally a lineage thing. A
back to the
lineage thing.
Hacker days. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would back what Jody is saying. Like he was obsessed with Frank Gotch. Like he just like
Really?
was just like this guy is like the guy. But there's also we have to understand
Lewis.
that, you know, well, yeah, and what Jody was talking about is you know, Karl was a lifelong learner. So after he left Billy Riley's gym, he came to the States and he started working. And I actually talked to both him and Frankie Kane, the great Mephisto. They both
Right.
can verify this same story. So it's pretty interesting to me that he came into Al Haft's territory in Ohio, and he trained with this cat named Frank Wolf. And Frank Wolf was like the scariest shooter. For Karl to say like this guy was legit, Karl was very sparing with praise. Frank Wolf, he held Frank Wolf higher above anybody else in terms of
Really?
people he learned to catch as catch can, the submission style from. Now, Al Haft, remember, Karl had that awful Nazi gimmick. And Al Haft, when he moved in to that territory, and Al Haft was friendly to shooters, and hence Frank Wolf, and I think they got along. Al Haft's old gimmick was young Gotch.
Yeah.
So I think there was just this natural confluence of events where Karl just was a shooter, loved shooters, and then Haft is bringing him in, and it just was like, it just made sense. I think there's kind of a bunch of reasons where Gotch came from.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Why did Frank Gotch retire in 15? I mean, he and Hackenschmidt had those huge bouts. And then, of course, you had the war in the late teens. And then you had, of course, the Spanish flu after that. But Gotch was on top of the world with those matches with Hackenschmidt. Why did Frank Gotch retire so young?
I don't remember. I don't know.
It's kind of controversial, actually. It depends who you ask. So, you know, the expert on this is Mike Chapman. I'm sure some of you guys know him.
I know Mike real well. Yeah.
Mike is like
there.
so what I'm doing for Billy or Jody's doing for Karl or Jerry's doing for Danny. Chapman.
You guys are the shooter guys. You're supposed to know all these answers about shooter people.
Humboldt, Iowa. There's a statue for Frank Gotch.
Yeah.
So this is where it gets controversial. Some people that are like just pushing on the, you know, promoting the Gotch thing would say, you know, that he got old, that there were challengers, that there was better money in vaudeville. He made a lot of money in vaudeville. But there's also this side of the story that kind of gets suppressed a little bit. And he was having challenges. Some people say it was syphilis. Other people don't know exactly what it was, but that he was really having some very serious health issues that he just couldn't compete anymore at the level where he was, you know, happy competing. So,
Mr. Brisco, we mentioned that your brother, Jack, legendary NWA champion, went through without being pinned in being taken down his entire season at Oklahoma. He and only Danny Hodge had done that. Your brother got into a legendary shoot match with Billy Robinson in Australia. Did he ever match up? I will ask you the story, but did he ever match up with Gotch either? Or did he ever have that little twinkling in his eye about it? That
no. Gotch and Jack never did. I'm out of all of us here. I'm the only one that's really had the pleasure of being in the ring with all these guys that we're discussing today. You know, at one time or another, and traveled the road with them, and the respect I had for them. But what I was going to ask earlier, and you guys brought it up just briefly. What was Billy and Karl's relationship pre-States? Were they, I mean, in the UK, it's a small, were they adversaries over there? Were they pals? Or tell us a little bit about that.
So the story goes, and this is well detailed in the book that I helped ghostwrite for Billy. And so when I was making my genetic argument, by the way, Jody, that's my first prong of attack. I've still now got to make my impact argument for Billy. But I want to address this
Jody,
question
we're
first.
in trouble now.
I want to affect this. I want to address this question. So Billy and Karl remember, it was Billy's uncle Alf who was down scouting for Billy Riley down at the Olympics, brought Karl up, and Karl in fact stayed at Billy's house. But Karl is, I think Karl was, if I get the number right, 14 years older than Billy.
Yeah, Karl was born in 33. I mean,
well,
23.
23, yeah, and Billy was 38, so it's like that, right? There's like,
my dad was born in 33. He was 10 years older than my dad.
Yeah, so Billy was 14 when he first started wrestling Karl at Billy Riley's gym. Karl had already placed at the Olympics, and Billy's like 14, 15 years old, getting hammered by Karl, who's also bigger than Billy, right? I think, what was Karl? He had to be 6'4", 6'3", something like that.
6'3",
I think Billy was maybe 6'1" at his peak. Yeah. So they had like an uncle-nephew relationship. And so what happened is there was this group called Joint Promotions, and they ran all the business in England, in the UK, and that's what got Big Bill Miller, after Karl got into all that heat where he beat up who was it? It wasn't Gorgeous George. Who did he beat up in the locker room?
Rogers.
Yeah, Buddy Rogers.
Buddy.
After he got all that heat.
Bill Miller was actually Karl's friend in Ohio. They were in Ohio together, and they would do road work together and stuff like that. Big Bill Miller. He was a vet, right? He was a veterinarian.
He was a vet, yeah.
And
he's the only guy that's in Ohio State. He's in 4 Hall of Fames in Ohio State.
Big man.
So Karl was having a hard time and was working as like a garbage man or something. Like he was really in a bad way.
I was in Hawaii.
Bill had somehow gotten a connection to Japan and gotten Karl over to Japan. And just, we all know, like, Karl just went into the Kodokan, destroyed everybody. Like, Karl just dominated Japan. And because Japan is such a combat culture, like, they don't do ball sports. Well, they do now, but back then it was like karate and judo and everything. Anyway, Karl was working for a promotion, and the rival promotion called up Wigan and asked Joy Promotions, hey, we need somebody that can do what this guy is doing here. And so that's how Billy got booked in Japan. But they didn't know, the Japanese didn't know that Billy and Karl were like uncle and nephew. And so they go over there, and Billy and Karl are having to work the Japanese. So they're like meeting in secret to go have tea and stuff, because the two rival promotions, they don't want to know that these guys are buddies. So anyway, I don't know how the hell I got to that story, but
but they were conflicted buddies.
Well, both guys strong-willed. I mean, just strong-willed, and if they didn't like you, they didn't. I mean,
they didn't like you, yeah.
And Jody, you've been with both when they've been having drinks or whatever, right?
No, back in 70. So it was 1970. I was a kid, obviously. Jerry was already grown up. I think he was a grandfather.
I'm still not a grandfather.
That's when he was wrestling Frank Gotch.
Yeah.
I mean, all those guys were coming in and out of Tampa. Danny was there. Luthez came through. All these guys were getting together. But it's funny, especially with Billy. There was always and Lou. There was always a little bit of tension in the air. They were respectful to each other. They were friendly to each other. I mean, Lou came up to my dad's gym, and he was there for a while. But there was always that little bit. You just kind of jockey.
Why do you think that is, Jody? Because I was young in the business, but I would see them. I'd see them in the locker room in Oklahoma, and these guys, they got so much, but they were kind of standoffish of each other, and always looked kind of envious of each other. I didn't know if it was that English type of deal or what.
Hey, Jerry, let me cut you off. When you say the guys, are you talking about Thez and Hodge?
Thez and Hodge and Gotch. I mean, they were always kind of standoffish around each other.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jody. I mean, all I was going to say is that these are guys that came from very hard backgrounds, as we've established, and really fought tooth and nail for what they got, and they got big. And I think they recognized as friendly and the business, but they also were competitive people by nature and really had to fight hard to get where they got. And that might have been a little bit that they recognized each other.
They were friendly. It was friendly rivalry. I mean,
yeah, it was friendly. Okay, I'm gonna go somewhere that we haven't touched on, and it's kind of a combination of all three guys. Now you got three of the guys that are considered three of the top shooters ever in our business, but they were never really that greatly successful in our business. Now I can go back to the day when I started in. Shooters don't draw money. Do you ever hear that, Jody? Shooters can't draw money. Jake, you ever hear that, in professional wrestling?
Look, I mean, when we were training guys, I would tell them, you can be the greatest guy on the mat you think you are, and yeah, you won't make a buck in this business.
Yeah, but you know where that came from, Jody? I can pinpoint it and tell you exactly where it came from. It came from Dick Hutton. Dick Hutton was a should have been a first four-time NCAA champion, but Vern Gagne beat him on a controversial referee decision in the finals his second year. So he was a three-time NCAA champion. But when it was going through one of those eras where wrestling wasn't really big at all, and Thez wanted out of the business for a while. They wanted to kind of pursue a Hollywood lifestyle and Hollywood, see if he could break into the movies out there. So the powers that be, the NWA committee, said, well, Dick Hutton's one of the most popular amateurs ever come out at that time. Let's put the NWA championship on Dick Hutton. They tried everything, and Dick was a great performer, and you get to ask anybody and look at it in the archives. He was a great performer, but Dick did not have the personality. We've all seen non-shooters and shooters and everybody that, are great in the ring, but, they bomb when they get on the mic. Well, Dick was one of those guys. They tried everything. Put a $100 bill on his chest. If you could beat me in 10 minutes, or you take this $100 bill or $1,000, whatever it was. But that's where that old rumor, shooter don't draw money. But that's been disputed, proved wrong so many times after Hutton. But that's basically where that came from. And plus, the deal was always heard. Promoters just didn't trust Hodge, Gotch, or Robinson to put their belt on because if they don't want to drop them, who's going to take them from them? And so they had to protect their territory. So that's kind of that always kind of bothered me. Being a college wrestler, that number one I was tagged with. You can't draw money, because you're a wrestler, and then number two, the trust factor, and I think. That's the reason my brother learned that from a very early age and was so giving. And he didn't care if he won or lost, because it didn't. He knew he could whoop their asses if he wanted to anyway. So
well, where does Lou Thez fit in this mix? You talk about Lou Thez being the old tough guy, the old shooter, but he's not listed when you list the greatest shooters. When you talk about
but he lists all the great shooters because he was brought up, by George Tragus, who Tragus is considered Jake, help me out. Tragus is considered the guy that kind of founded the mixed martial arts back in the 40s and 50s.
Well, yeah, he had two huge influences, right? Right. George Tragus, who was just a notorious. I think he was in St. Louis. He was Greek shooter, just brutal, mean. Yeah. But then he also had connection through Tragus to I think who you're actually thinking of is Ad Santel. Who's the catch wrestler who went over and just really did all these mixed matches, dominated.
Exactly. That's
playing the catch wrestling flag, the catch can flag.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Thez was not considered even at the time.
No. Thez was just a big, rugged, tough guy. I mean, there were different back in those days. Even a tough guy and a shooter. I mean, there were a lot of tough guys in our business, but even the tough guys really didn't want to mix it up with the shooter too much because they knew they'd get taken down.
But you know what happens with the stories that get out there that aren't legit, but they become stories that are legit just by the sheer nature of telling them over and over again. Yeah. I mean, there are stories out there where people had Lou Thez, hooking Gotch.
Yeah.
When
I've never heard one of those, but I've probably I don't doubt it.
So when Thez would do the side press deal, he'd drop guys. He wouldn't be. Karl used to get so pissed off because he wouldn't protect guys. So he went to do it to Karl, and Karl said nope, and that's how he broke Thesz's ribs. Well, part of the story too that sits out there is that then Thez hooked him and made Karl give up. I mean, Karl never said that. I never heard that.
I never heard that one
He
either.
would have, and you know, here's the thing about Karl. He would have told me, because he told me when he told me times where, you know, he came out on the short end of things, especially early on in his life, and where he got
Who was that against, Joe? Do you recall?
well when he was, I mean, when he was in Wigan, and you know, guys like Billy Joyce and what's the other guy's name that was in Wigan?
Riley?
Yeah, Riley. You know,
Bill,
he would tell me when he first got out there that these guys would run him through the mill. So he wasn't shy about doing that if it was legit. But when, you know, when a guy wasn't able to stand up against Karl wasn't going to put him over, at least, you know, verbally.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
and, you know, it's
so,
interesting. It's interesting because I actually had to, I had the same question early on. And you know who I went to? I went to Gene LaBelle.
Yeah.
And I asked Gene, and I said, Gene, you put Karl and you put Thez in a shoot. And he's like, Karl, and this is on record, you can go find it on the internet, but he's like, Karl would win.
Yeah.
And I think you can understand it, right? Like, so if we look at Thez, he's got this reputation of a shooter, but he came up, he learned shooting. If you watch his matches, he's doing legit holds, legit moves. He's fantastic. You could tell he's got a good background. But man, he got the strap when he was like 20 years old in a protected business. It was protected by then when he got the strap. So at that point, when you're 20 years old, and you know, anybody that's actually wrestled, you know, it takes like 12 hours for you to get rusty. So now you got a young guy who was really talented, had a good look, and then he's not doing competitive matches anymore because he's protected for the business. You know,
And LaBelle, I mean, you know, coming from LaBelle, he always said that Karl was the guy.
yeah.
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 Where does LaBelle fit into everything? You know, people talk about so much about
He's like the godfather of ball shooter, really. I mean, you get right down to it. Even
For those
Well,
that are watching, he had the first, I guess, considered mixed martial arts match against Milo Savage back in the mid '60s, where they thought he killed him because he choked him out, and they started to riot. So,
But
how?
I think
he was a judo guy, right? He was a judoka.
I think Jody nailed it though, kind of when he was alluding to the impact that all guys that we're talking about here had on mixed martial arts. And you know, if we look at it, mixed martial arts kind of looks like an all-in match, right? It's like just no pinning, but you can submit, you can punch, you can kick. So Karl, Billy, Danny, these are all guys we know that had mixed martial arts existed back then, they would have dominated. They would have been at the top levels with belts for sure.
You think
Where-
I'm gonna jump on there. Even without the jujitsu and all that.
We know wrestlers dominate. We know that, don't we?
Well, yeah,
Statistically-
at one time, every UFC champion was a college wrestler. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, we know that, like, because they've run this experiment, and you know, so this is an interesting thing, right? So you brought up this thing about shooters don't sell. I think it's the business model. So yeah, in a worked, if I have the alternative between watching a shoot match and some craziness with table ladders and chairs or something, of course that's going to get my attention because it's just crazy. But I think the UFC has shown that shooters can sell. It's just how are you packaging it, and you can't put it on the variety show with something totally outrageous because then it just pales in comparison. So you know, Gene, I think where Gene fits in on this, to kind of circle back to John's question, is that MMA is really, I look at MMA as a form of pro wrestling. It's shoot wrestling variant, okay? And I think Gene LaBelle and Karl and Billy and Danny, I think they were all mega instrumental in this new shoot product that we see ever since the UFC and these other promotions have been around. Like, yeah, like you mentioned, he had the first televised mixed martial arts match against this boxer Milo Savage in Salt Lake. He was the referee for the Muhammad Ali Inoki match, and Karl was in Inoki's corner.
He wanted so bad to get a hold of Ali. That was hysterical to me.
Hey,
So I
who
think
was it
Gene
that trained?
LaBelle
Was
I
it
think
Billy
Gene
Robinson?
LaBelle factors in.
Was it Billy Robinson that trained Sakuraba, the Gracie
Yeah.
hunter?
Yeah.
So we had Harry.
Sakuraba, but Sakuraba was at Fujiwara Gumi with me. I mean, we trained together. We had matches together. Obviously, we had work matches. But that's Karl's influence. So they all had a finger in the pie.
Yeah, it was very and Hodge was out there for the UWFI as well. It was Fez Robinson and Hodge that were brought in to help train a lot of those guys, where you see Dan Severn in there, Bad News Allen, a lot of shooter guys. So the influence of every guy that we're talking about today, I know we're all advocating and having good fun, but I mean their influence, to me, the guys we're talking about, especially the guys we're talking about, are the Mount Rushmore of mixed martial arts, honestly.
And Sakuraba had the greatest shoot gimmick ever, the Gracie hunter.
Gracie killer.
Oh my God, that's unbelievable. The amount of Gracies that he won matches over. It's unbelievable.
He was a tough kid.
And they were fun.
You trained
they
with
were
him,
really fun to watch.
Jody?
Yeah, I was legit on the mat with him. Yeah. Well, I mean, we all, Ken was there, Shamrock was there.
Yeah.
All these guys were coming in and out. Funaki and Suzuki before they went on over to Pancrase, even though that was worked, or some of it was. They were all tough.
Everyone tells the best story about
going back to my original question. Did Gotch or Billy ever complain to either one of you why they were held back, or their thoughts on why they didn't achieve the greatness that other guys with less skill achieved?
Promoters. The promoters. That's what I constantly heard. It mostly from Karl, but yeah, promoters, a lot of it.
Well, I mean, it's that old, Karl was the guy that would shout this from the mountaintop, along with my dad. There were only two types of promoters, Jer. Yeah. Bad and worse. That was the theme back in the day.
Yeah.
Karl, but Karl didn't. I mean, at least with me, through the years, he never really dwelled on why he didn't get a shot, because he was so lucky in falling into Japan the way that he did. That kind of just that shadowed in a good way every lousy thing that happened here in the States. But even in the States, he got used. I mean, he held the world tag team with Renee for WWF. Putting on a couple W's in there. Yeah.
Karl was famous for his training. I saw it. I told you guys before he came on air, an old video. It's 20-something minutes on YouTube of him training with Inoki, and it's just a little bit boring because they just you watch a training video without any sound. It's really not that interesting. But I started because we're doing this. I thought I'll try some of this training. I couldn't do any of it, so I just think it's all stupid and it doesn't work.
You're right. It is stupid, and it leads to a lot of orthopedic surgeries later on in life.
But
that replacement.
So I mean, if we're gonna, we're kind of talking all over the place here, but let's get back to Impact for a second, just for a second, because it suits me.
Okay.
I mean, when it comes to training and what it takes to be competent on the mat, having what's your best hold? Your best hold is conditioning, right? I would ask people that, I get into these classes, I'm like, what's your best hold? And then I go, no, you're wrong. It's conditioning. When you talk conditioning, you talk training, you talk Karl Gotch. There's nobody out there across the pantheon of folks that we were talking about or beyond that had that much impact on training, even outward from the wrestling piece onto people in everyday life who, the Gotch Bible. The Gotch Bible was never really the Gotch Bible. He made it the Gotch Bible. Using the cards, I told I told people up in Waterloo when we were up at that place up there.
Dan Gable Museum.
The Dan Gable Museum.
That's where Mr. Brisco died last year.
Damn it, and he's still here. Thank God. Thank God. We're glad you're here, because it would be a boring. I mean, you'd just be a black screen right now.
Yeah, you'd have a picture of you there, and
yeah, but I mean, now
He'll never get back. He'll never get back. Never. He won't. He tried to
Just
pull the
go
Jody
to sit
Malenko.
there, JB,
He's
all
shy.
right, so
He
it's
figured it
like-
out.
They can teach old dogs new tricks.
I thought he went to go get his comb.
But back to the impactful side of these guys. Not that they were impacted, but the impact. That's a pharmacy joke. Back to these guys being impactful. I mean, Karl's reach went beyond the sport of wrestling. There are people in places that are unspoken of, that are going through a deck of cards nowadays, or they have a push-up board that was made by somebody, or they're using a mace ball because somebody decided that mace balls were great, and they're using clubs because somebody decided that clubs were great, and have capitalized on that. Like guys like who am I thinking of, Jake?
Well,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
I mean, you're right, and
You're
and
right,
I
yeah.
think it is very difficult in this kind of situation to not give the nod to Karl on impact. The guy was like, I mean, I'm not conceding. I'm saying I'm giving due respect because it is enormous the impact that Karl Gotch had, and more so on my perspective, coming from more of the mixed martial arts world.
Yep.
And the competitive grappling world. Yeah, it's undeniable because
Well,
what Jody's giving me a hard time
I-
about is I made those like that Indian bowling ball on the end of a broomstick, and I took it to market. I learned that from Karl. I was like, oh my God, this thing's amazing. My
I'm not
grip
giving you a
strength-
hard time. I'm
yeah.
Hey,
more
I didn't
Yeah.
have any idea that it would go over, but it did, and that's 100% because, again, Karl's impact. Like I was like, this needs to hit a bigger market, and that's because of Karl.
Yeah, well, I agree with both of you. That's where Hodges kind of falls down to number 3 in my opinion. Because Hodge was one of those guys that went out. He didn't have the training school. He didn't train a lot of guys like Gotch did. He didn't train a lot of guys like Billy did later on. So that's kind of where Hodge fell. But Hodge's method is old school method. Jody mentioned conditioning. I listened to an interview that Danny did. He must have mentioned that he was in better condition than anybody he ever wrestled every time. And I can almost testify to that because he'd push me sometime. I remember I was in a match in Jacksonville, Florida. We're having to go close to an hour match and hot as hell there. And I'm chugging on my chest and Danny whispered to me in that voice, and Danny, I didn't know they had a train station close by, shooter. What do you mean? He said, all I could hear, sound like a damn train coming down the track, sucking wind. I mean, and Danny would push you, and Danny would punish you if you couldn't keep up with him. That's kind of Danny's MO too. That's kind of that MO that both of these other guys that we're discussing. If you didn't keep up with these guys, I could testify because like I said, I was privileged enough to be with all 3 of them. And if you weren't in condition and you didn't carry your load, they would push you until you just gave up. I mean,
Embarrassing.
So,
Yeah.
Mr. Briscoe, let me ask you: is this fair to say when you compare the 3? Is it fair to say because you look at great athletes, and great is great. So if you see this great athlete on one hand, and he or she is very analytical, can dissect the sport, can tell you how to do things, tell you how to hit a baseball, how to make a basketball, how to hit a fade, whatever it is, they can explain it to you succinctly. Then you look at this athlete over here who's also great, just as good, just tells you, I just see the ball and I shoot it.
Yeah.
It's all feel. It's innate. I don't know if Michael Jordan would have been a great coach or not because he never coached.
We had Wade Boggs on. His solution to hitting wasn't scientific, wasn't analytical. You see the ball, you hit the ball
Hit
over
it.
there.
Right.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
is Hodge different from these guys? Not in the level of greatness, but is Hodge different as far as these 2 guys were very analytical, could tell you the sport, could dissect the sport. Hodge just did it because he was a great athlete. He could break.
Hodge
I think you hit something.
Hodge was a natural, just that natural instinct. And guys, that's what I think we're overlooking in all 3 of these guys. the toughness, the mental toughness that all three, we all know all three. I mean, we all were privileged where we got to breathe the same air as all three. But there's something that stood out with these guys was always their mental toughness, and that goes back to Lou Thez. Lou Thez was not a really tough guy. I mean, he was a accomplished guy, but he had that mental toughness where that was the air that he projected to everybody when he walked in the dressing room. Hey,
I see. Yeah.
Don't touch, don't. And Hodge, Gotch, and Robinson, Billy Robinson walk in, Billy all 6'3" or whatever he was, 280 pounds. That's something, you look at that man, wow, he's a Karl with, that posture that he always had,
The barrel chest.
Yeah, big old posture, big sticking out Hodge, and and dressed up, and and his politeness and everything. But you always felt that mental toughness around those guys, and I think that's what set them apart, and in a lot of cases from other really tough guys.
Jerry, did your brother Jack never have a go with Hodge? I mean, you got competing
Oh
schools.
yeah, of course they did. Yeah, competing schools, like you say, Oklahoma, OU. I mean, they had some 60-minute brawls, especially when Jack was first starting in the business. Because when you're a rookie, John, you went through Jody, you went through the same thing. Guys want to push you a little bit because you have a little bit of reputation that you're bringing carrying into the ring with you.
Oh, you pushed me as a referee.
Well, because I knew you were a Gotch disciple, and I wanted to find out how tough Gotch was. I figured if I could handle you, you're 50 years younger, and I could handle that old man. But how wrong was I?
I think I told you
I couldn't even handle you as a referee. Yeah, you'd shoot back on me. Jake, I mean, that guy, we hired him to do a simple job, count 1, 2, 3. He's out there, he's poking me, he's doing everything he can to.
Here we go again. This is the story that's going to follow me to my grave.
But anyway, the mental toughness on guys, and the different styles of workout, but you kind of talk about them, and they weren't that. Danny was never a weight guy. I mean, you could look at that. Danny just had that natural 225-pound body, 6'2", just chiseled cut and lean and mean. But Danny work out. We had Sheldon Bender, and Sheldon never worked out. Now he's working out. He's a damn monster. But Danny's one of those guys that very seldom went to the gym. But Danny would come into the locker room. Danny's workout. He could take a towel, start twisting it. You hold one end of it, and you could come on, do a little pulling with me, as Danny liked to call it. We would twist the towel. We'd pull it back and forth, twist it some more. That's it, and then Danny would put it back here. He'd pull it like that. He would make use of anything that he could just to get a workout in and get a sweat going and get his breath.
And Jerry,
going.
he was famous for his grip of taking a newspaper and taking it from the center and crumbling
our phone books. Yeah.
And crumble.
He'd take New York Times and just crumble them up, and it'd be a pile like that. Danny's little pile would be like that,
But that may have built his strength. That didn't give him his strength, right? That just was born to him by God, right?
That was born. He just had that natural body, which Karl and Billy had the same thing. They were just given to him like God's gift to them.
Good guys, yeah.
So what did these guys think, all three of them? Anyone you can answer this about other guys out there? People talk about John Pesic being maybe one of the greatest shooter, tough guys of all time, who was Ed Strangler Lewis's policeman. But there's always been these policemen, these really tough guys. Stanislaus Sabisco took the title off of, was it Wayne Munn back in 27 in the first
Ed Strangler Lewis, yeah.
First big screw job. What did these guys think about these other guys? They ever talk about them? What do you guys think about them? Let me know.
Well, Karl would recount stories of all these guys. He had a fondness for Lewis mainly because he met Lewis when Lewis was at the end of his time and blind already, and he was just proud of the fact that I guess when him and there's a famous picture of him and Lewis standing together, and when Strangler Lewis felt him, I guess because he couldn't see, he had to feel him, and he knew that Karl had this big barrel chest, so he made comment to the fact that he knew that Karl had something going for him just because he probably had endurance because he had a chest that was ridiculous. Yeah, but he told me. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it's funny because this keeps coming up, and what Billy used to tell me is that because John, you brought it up, and then now Jody's bringing up about the posture of Karl in particular, and at Wigan, I guess Billy would tell us that that his nickname at Wigan, they would give him a hard time. They would call him Chesty because he was always walking around with his chest out, which is, hey, that's cool, man. He's prideful. But you know, Billy had a different perspective. He would always, his favorite guy was always Billy Joyce, the guy who he got the title from, had the most respect for him. But you know what Billy really tried to emphasize is he always felt like a lot of these guys, these old timers, like a Ed Lewis or like a Gotch, or these guys got plenty of press. And he wasn't up on a lot of like the Tiger Man out of Nebraska, Pesic, like you're talking about, or these other guys. Wayne Katonin or these other old shooters. Billy always tried to emphasize, you know what? There, for every guy you heard of, there was 1,000 tough dudes that would eat everybody today alive, and nobody's ever heard of them. And he would try to give them a little bit of a mention here and there and drop some names. Like there are a lot of them are in the book.
Gotch's mom. Gotch's mom.
There we go.
Danny's dad.
She would have kicked everybody's ass.
You know, you mentioned about Wigan and the United States as in a comparison, you know, and tough is tough. You know, if you're tough guys everywhere, it's not like the one's necessarily tougher. But you mentioned that a lot of people don't understand. America had a lot of great shooters coming through. You know, Roy Welch was one of the first. You know, the Fuller's grandfather was one of the first to start up the territories in the Tennessee, barnstorming tough guys. You know, he'd go into a bar, he wasn't that big, he'd lose an arm wrestling match, he'd lose something else. Then he challenged the guy to a wrestling match. It was all a setup, you know, then he'd end up destroying this guy and winning money, which is a pretty tough way to make a living fighting for real in bars in the Great Depression. But what was it that the training for the United States in England, it was coming out of basically one place, the Wigan, the snake pit, for the most part.
It was the North. There were competing gyms. Bolton, which is the neighbor city of Wigan, is really considered the hotbed at that time. But Wigan did have Riley's gym, Sharnock's gym. It was a hotbed, right? And a lot of that had to do with
Jake, why do you think it was a hotbed? Because of the training or because of the environment around them, or what made
I think it was a couple things, right? Like from my understanding of the history, one, the biggest component was the blue collar element, that it was like hard living, and these were very, very poor people, coal miners, and one way out for them was side bets, meaning they would bet on wrestling matches, and those were the first professional wrestlers, were the guys that could make enough money off of side bets that they didn't have to go bent over all day, hunched over, getting coal. So I think that's huge. Just we talk about the toughness. I think that stock is really important. That just manual labor. That's why farmers do so well in the States, right? In wrestling, but and ranchers and such. So I think that's the first thing. But it was also just being in the north of England at that time, because you actually had, and this is an interesting connection to Karl, you had these Flemish weavers coming from Belgium and the Netherlands, and they had their own weird submission wrestling style that they settled in the north of England in Lancashire County. Then you had the Irish coming in, and they brought in Irish collar and elbow. And then you had like the hillbillies, because you have to understand in England, it's backwards from the States. The country people are north, the sophisticated cosmopolitans are down south by London. So the country folk were doing like this rough and tumble street fighting stuff that was really not considered. And that amalgamation of all that stuff in the north made it amazing. But I will say this, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I think it's simple. We haven't really seen England in the Olympics ever on wrestling. Billy did beat a bunch of people on the Flemish, wrestling team that placed and whatnot, and Karl was an Olympian. I don't think England, I think it was a one-time deal. I'm going to be real. And then I think a lot of that lifestyle in the United States, plus the institutionalization of folk style wrestling, really made America, you think on the international wrestling scene, it's like Iran, America, Eastern Europe. That's it.
So where did the pipeline of shooters come from in the United States? It came out of mainly Wigan area in England. Where did it come from in the United States? where were these guys coming out of that we had?
The Midwest,
Midwest, yeah, Midwest.
And was there certain schools, certain
the
trainers, certain guys that were training these guys to get into the
well,
wrestling
it goes
business?
back to actually, John. It goes back to Farmer Burns, and Jake will
Yep.
probably
Sure.
it goes right all the way back.
Burns
to
was
Farmer-
Burns was
Farmer-
the guy that
Yeah.
created wrestling in America. But what
Right.
happened, it was kind of that Civil War, potato famine, 1870s time that pushed everybody out of the north of England. And then you go watch gangs in New York, you just went straight from, if you were a guy who knew wrestling probably, because there was no TV, no Xbox, no Tinder, anything like that, you went straight into the Civil War. And then that spread across the United States because you could do wrestling. I didn't need a ball. I didn't need pads. I didn't need a special court or a net. I could just find another nut to go have a bet who could beat each other and pin the other guy. And that's where it really took off. But it got real popular during the Civil War. But then it was Farmer Burns really was probably the most influential guy. And I think that's still why Iowa is kind of a mecca when it comes to the United States. It's just because he was the first to really push it out.
Yeah. Jake,
Also-
we had Pat Militech, as you know, on our podcast, and
Yeah.
you know when his family migrated over here, they looked at him. Oh, you're farmers. Well, Iowa's where you should go. So the immigration people kind of were the ones that kind of steered all those tough guys in that one area there. So when the immigrants started coming over, you know, they'd look at the guy, you know, oh, you're an athlete, or you're this, you're a tough guy, or you come from a hard scrabble lifestyle. You know, the Midwest is where we're going to ship you. So all those families, so that mental attitude was already out there, and then on top of it, you know, that's how they became tough son of guns.
I mean, the theme here is adversity, right? It drives. It's like during the Depression, the middleweights, boxing middleweights. I mean, there was a class of boxing middleweights during the Depression era that were just phenomenal because they were challenged. Everybody was challenged.
And there were so many of them. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, there were more middleweights than there are heavyweights, of course, you know, so.
Yeah, and after the Depression, you had, you know, Jim Londos, you know, the Greek god, you know, became this great champion, drew good money. But you didn't really have any. Of course, then you had World War II, but then the television is what created the boom. You know, after that,
Right.
you know, you really lost. You took a step down after Gotch. You know, you had Stetcher and you had Lewis and you had a bunch of guys in there. You know, they kind of filled the void. Thez did a great job carrying that for decades, you know, throughout that time.
That thing you think of it, what you're saying, that Thez was a transitional guy from that tough guy attitude to
Yes.
the showbiz that we see now, basically.
Yep. Yeah, the road.
Thez has probably turned over in his grave me saying that, but you know, you track it down. That's basically where it was. That the television part, and Thez was a perfect guy to transition. You know, well built, good looking, immigrant looking guy, and he was American.
The robe and the towel, and yeah.
Yeah, then you have, you know, of course, Gorgeous George, which helped give birth to Muhammad Ali, and then all the great, you know, hype that comes around, and then, you know, MMA, which took forever to get off the ground, and now there's a place for all these incredible shooters to go, and shooters can draw money. We found out.
Yeah.
Well, you brought it up. I mean, the MMA guys. I mean, MMA. Well, I forgot what I was going here, but how do you guys feel that our respective a guy that we have in our corner now we're talking about would do in modern day MMA, and I'll start with you, Jody, on that. How do you think Gotch would have done in modern day MMA?
Well, number one, he wouldn't have liked the current rule set. Because if you're going to go as far as it goes now, Karl would have just said, let's just have a freaking street fight. You know, in his day when I was training with him, it was mixed martial arts, but it was still wrestling. So I mean, you could pin. But as far as just sheer conditioning and toughness and, you know, strength of will and his level of competency is, if he wouldn't have been a champion, you know, heavyweight guy, I would have been real surprised. Probably a Hall of Famer guy. He never stopped making his game better every single all day. That's all he did all day long. He just sat and thought about how he was going to do something different, how he was going to train differently, how he was going to change up a move differently. That's all he ever talked about.
And that to me is the difference between, say, Billy Robinson, Karl Gotch, and Danny Hodge. Hodge, it appears to me, was a guy who it came naturally to him. He loved it, but he was just really good at it. You say Gotch would sit around all day and think about new moves and think about that. I don't think, Mr. Brisco, I'm asking you, that Hodge would think that. Hodge was just a guy that was really good and born with this God-given strength and talent that made him successful.
You're absolutely right. Hodge, Hodge, the way Hodge helped people, like he helped me and my brother. You'd be in those car rides, and us old wrestlers like to talk about car rides. You get in that car and you're 6 hours with Danny. Danny's going to tell you what you did. He could remember a match like photographic memory. And he remembered your match. If you asked Danny to watch your match and give you critique on a 6 hour, man, he gave you a critique for 6 hours. He would break down everything. So Danny did have that mind, but he didn't sit there all day thinking about how he's going to get better and all. Because Danny had those skills already. So
yeah. And Jake, how do you think Billy Robinson would do?
I think all three guys would be dominant just because they were obsessed and they were super tough. And they'd have the benefit of the technology that a lot of people didn't have back then. You could go watch other matches. You can go learn technique from all kinds of people in a way that you never could back when they did. I think they would absolutely crush it. And I think it's one because of the toughness, but also kind of what Jody was saying and Jerry's alluding to, and that's their obsession. Like they were like truly upset, like single-minded on wrestling. I do think to what Jody said, there would be a complaint about the rule set, and particularly the missing of the pin, I think would be very annoying. I know Billy always was like, yeah, if there's no pin, it's not catch wrestling, because the pin forces somebody to throw their arm up, which opens them up to an arm bar, or, it actually pushes the action. So, it's interesting though, because I did know Karl fairly well towards the end of his life, and he and I worked on a straight catch-as-catch-can rule set to leverage off the popularity of the MMA and the grappling, and it was all submissions plus pinning, which is effectively competitive grappling under pro wrestling rules, which is really what we're talking about here, shooting.
Jody, I got a question for me. I kind of asked you the same on we had you on the podcast, but you brought it up earlier about orthopedic injuries. the body weight training, all the neck bridges, the free body weight squats. I know a lot of wrestlers when they get older are bunged up. A lot of that has to do with the contact of wrestling. The training itself, do you think the training itself, just the body weight stuff that Karl Gotch did and all these guys did, do you think it lends itself to a healthy body at age 70, or do you think it breaks it down after doing so much stress on the body for so long?
Well, Jody's a medical guy. Let him lead the way.
No, I think both. It's a yin and a yang. It's both. I think when number one, we weren't built to do neck bridges, and we definitely weren't built to put our feet up against the wall and remove our hands and just sit there on our head and go side to side. We weren't meant to go back into a bridge with a barbell and a 45 on each side of the bar, and to actually go back into a bridge on our heads. Even if you did it right and you were kind of light with it, it's a lot of wear and tear, lower back, vertebrae. Your neck. There's no way around. There's no way to escape if you train under Karl. There's no way that anybody could have escaped some of the orthopedic difficulties later on in life. But your general health is better. I was
just curious. Extreme anything is generally tough on the body. I was just curious about it. You see so many old guys, they're all bunged up, but you don't know if it's bunged up from all the years of wrestling or the years of training. I'm
going to jump in there, John. Danny Hodge died at 80 some odd years old. His body was not the issue at all. Danny's body was as fit as probably a 50-year-old man at the time of Danny's passing. It was his mind and his inside. So I don't think his method of training was totally different as we had earlier. The pulling and the stuff like that where Danny would go. And Danny didn't do a lot of bridges because he was never on his back enough to bridge. And so I think that's you had a good point. You know, our body's not made for that, as Jody said there. But you know, Danny's body was never beat up through all the years of Greco and freestyle and folk style wrestling that he did and professional.
I mean, people used to tell me all the time, "Oh, those squats are so bad for your knees, so bad for your knees." God knows how many squats I've done, you know, hundreds of thousands, and I never really had problems with my knees. Now, as
I can testify to that because I got my lawnmower stuck in my leg, and Jody, I just called Jody. Jody, remember all those squats you did? I'm gonna put them to work today.
He did too.
Come and lift my lawnmower.
I had to move his lawnmower for him
out of the lake.
You know, everybody's different. I've had a bunch of knee surgeries. To me, doing weight squats is the best thing for my back and knees. And some guys that have knee surgeries, it's the worst thing for them.
Yeah.
You know, so everybody's different. May be the answer. I don't know.
Jake, how was the damage on Billy's body? Because I know he was
beat up.
He was beat up.
Yeah,
there.
so it's really interesting because I think you are right, John. I think it is a case by case basis. I think it just depends a lot. There's so many factors into it. I think Jody's also right. Like there are parts of the body, like the cervical vertebrae, that are just not designed to bear load. And so if you do some of those exercises so you can beat other people, there may be long-term ramifications. But, you know, you look at a guy like Billy, he had a different approach to training than Karl. So Karl is famous for the conditioning is your greatest hold and all that. Well, Billy came from a different school, and he was like, I think wrestling is the best form of conditioning for wrestling. And so it depends who you talk to. You were mentioning how Hodge looked amazing well into his 80s and 90s, Jerry. Well, you know, we both know Wade Chalice. Wade Chalice is like my uncle, and this guy is in his 70s, and I guarantee you, I know his lungs aren't where they used to be, but he could crush 95% of the guys that are these young guys coming, and he moves great. And he's even had a hip replacement.
Mr. Pinning machine there.
Yeah,
America's greatest pinner. But so, you know, I think it's also there's like genetics. I think there's and diet and. So
and if you look at Wade and Danny, they're built a lot alike.
Lanky, yeah.
And you look at Jody Malenko, he looks great.
Why, thank you, John.
Nobody had to say
Karl Gotch's best looking student. So guys, I hate to that's right. So I hate to do this to Mr. Brisco and Mr. Malenko because I think Jody, I think Jake is loaded for bear here. So guys, give us, unless you have something else, your final thoughts and your impact on these legends that you both know that you all know so well. Go, Jake. We'll let you go first. And if you bring up Jethro Bodine, I'm just going to give you the title.
All right, well, of course, Max Bear is in the story, but I mentioned the genetic argument. We've talked about Sakuraba. We've talked about UFC youngest heavyweight champion Josh Barnett. Like, well, maybe we didn't, but we should.
We just had Josh on. What a wonder! Hey, he was awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad you guys had him on.
What a wonderful guy.
I knew it'd be a good connection.
Fantastic. Such a
very smart guy.
You know, all these guys who make themselves out, you know, become these great champions, especially at something as hard as mixed martial arts. We got to have certain different, are obviously really smart guys. You know, it shows when you talk to them.
Yeah, he's super sharp. And so Billy had this wonderful influence on all those guys. But, you know, also, Billy also trained, like he had his first class. And you guys might know him, Marty Jones, #1, Marty Jones out of England, World of Sport. He trained Marty Jones. Marty Jones was a multi-time amateur champion because of Billy. He was friends also, as Jody mentioned, a guy named Sasahara. Sasahara was was Sakuraba's college coach, and then got passed off again through Fujiwara Gumi, but also a lot of training with Billy. But in addition, you know, Billy went and wrestled the world, taking on all comers, and he ended up in Nepal, and he wrestled for the king of Nepal in 1966, and all the way from 66, and maybe it was 62, but from early 60s, I think, all the way to 1996, there was actually a Billy Robinson Cup held every year at St. Xavier's Catholic Orphanage and University in Billy's honor. In addition, he did that fantastic Oscar-worthy performance in the 1970s film The Wrestler with Ed
Ed
Asner
Asner,
and Vern Gagne. So
I got that
and
movie.
then he had that massive influence on MMA. So, John, I just got 2 words for you. Max Bear.
Max, that's exactly right. That's it. That's it. That Jethro Bodine wins it. So, Mr. Briscoe, give us your thoughts on Danny Hodge and the impact.
Danny Hodge's impact. I mean, Danny Hodge's impact is felt today in collegiate wrestling, as we hit on real briefly. The most dominant wrestling award in the United States, given each year to the most dominant wrestler in NCAA wrestling, and then not only NCAA wrestling. Now it's all already filtered down to high school Hodge winners. There's a trophy called the Danny Hodge Award that's given to the most dominant wrestlers. It's kind of like a Naismith for the basketball people and a Heisman for the football people. But Danny's is now given to girls high school wrestlers, to men high school wrestlers, and men's and women college wrestlers. It's an award that's respected. So his impact is everlasting like that, and it will always be. Danny Hodge. The world will always know who Danny Hodge is through his wrestling abilities. So that's it.
And Jody, your thoughts on Karl Gotch?
You change Joe Malenko.
There you go. Bingo. You just beat
and I'm not
Jethro
finished
Bodine.
with Hodge. I'm not finished with Hodge. In that amateur tournament that he knocked out everybody, him and Max Bear were in opposite brackets.
So
I hit the impact thing early on just because I felt like it. So there's not much more to say. The one thing that I always tell people is that, I was front and center with all these guys in Tampa, Florida, where they were all together at various times.
At a young age too.
At a very young age, but I've always been decent reading people, and I always knew, and I don't say too many things unless I'm close to 100%. I always knew when all these guys were together who the alpha male in the room was. It was very evident. Now that's just me saying it. I was front and center. It's anecdotal at best, but yeah. So
thank you, Jody. You're saying I was in that locker room. Thank you.
Well, guys, my opinion as the moderator is great is great and tough is tough. And this business is so lucky to have these 3 guys. What 3 incredible legends and 3 incredible tough guys. I mean, you wish they were still here so you could sit down with them and just sit around and BS and have a couple drinks and just listen to their stories and their knowledge and all that. Now, as far as winning, Jake, I think you were by far the most prepared. Mr. Briscoe, you had the most personal knowledge of all 3. And Jody, you're by far the best looking.
Thank you.
So that's but guys, I can't tell you how much this I thought this was awesome. But you talk about the great shooters of this business. This is a dialogue that you could do for hours and hours and hours. And there's some of the most interesting things ever. You talk about these old tough guys. I mean, it's just what an incredible business that we're a part of.
And we're not taking away from it. As we hit on very early in this show, there were 2 types. There were the shooter type and there were the tough guys. I mean, there were some badass tough guys in our business. I mean, we all know, Billy Wicks is one of them. It could classify as a shooter and a tough guy. Sputnik Rosebath, Roy Welch, as you mentioned.
Bert Azzaretti.
Bert Azzaretti. I mean,
yeah, that's right. That's such a big distinction and a fair distinction to make. The shooter guys were the guys that would stretch you. They're just
laugh while they're doing it. Then you got the bad guys, just knock your ass out and walk away from you.
Yeah.
So,
Haku.
There are two.
That's right, Haku.
There's 2 different types of guys in our business. Are considered like that. A shooter guy, well, they're good. You don't want to mess with them. Tough guy, you don't want to get in a bar fight with him. No matter how good a shooter you are.
And then there's Cream Puff Jerry Briscoe.
Yeah, Cream Puff.
Exactly.
Thank you, Jody. Who bullied referees? That is.
Well, guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you.